Gosh, this was so good. So, Math wrote the book on the Canadian workplace culture, and this was everything you need to know about working in Canada. Honestly, I mean, maybe not everything. I'm sorry, I'm generalizing right now. I'm being pompous. Like, if you're just coming to Canada and you're looking to just kind of get going, I think you should listen to this. You should also get his book, by the way. You should get his book. This was a really good one. I'm not going to say anything. Just go listen to it. Go listen to it. Honestly, damn. Let's get to it. I think the first question I'm just going to ask, or where I'll start off with, is like, what led to you writing the book? Like, what was great? What were you thinking about when you decided I'm going to write a book on the Canadian work culture? You know, because it's become like a seminal. I feel like it's everyone says, go read Matt's book. Like, just go read Matt's book.
Well, that's exciting, and it was an interesting journey. I was born in Canada and raised here, and I think that I didn't realize it, but early on when I was younger, I think I had some challenges with various roles I was in. And I wasn't sure why, and I don't know. And I had moved overseas, and I'd worked in a couple of different countries, Korea, Japan, and I kind of settled in Macau. I was there for about 10 years, I think. And I don't know, something happened. I met my wife there. We had kids there. And I guess we made a move back to Canada I made a move back, and that was new for my wife and kids. But it was 2007, and when I arrived, I don't know. Sometimes it's known as reverse culture shock. I don't know, when you've been out of your country and your culture for a long time, suddenly when you come back to it, you just start to see things really clearly. And I think it was learning about different cultures and having to be a student of different cultures as well, like living in different places. You have to know, and especially if you're a mature person, for example, when you're a kid growing up in a culture, you kind of take that for granted as you learn it through osmosis. But when you're older and you're a professional and you need to get your career started, and suddenly you're faced with this, okay, what do I need to know? What am I missing? And so you depend on good friends in those cultures to kind of help you and help you fill in those pieces. And so that was essential. So basically, living in different places, becoming a real student of culture and how it works. And so when I came back to Canada, I had that fresh lens. And so and it wasn't an easy transition. I had forgotten many lessons that I thought I knew. And so it was a bit of a challenge for me. And as I started out, I started meeting international professionals that were looking to start their careers. And I started to notice similar patterns of what they were running into, what I was running into. Then even people I grew up with here that were running into roadblocks and barriers in their careers. And so it just suddenly started to occur to me what maybe were the pieces that were missing and nobody told us about. And there was really no book. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to just sit down and I'm going to put all these things together. And it's kind of people did it for me when I was living abroad. And so this is kind of me paying it forward, saying, you know what, if you are a professional moving here and you need to know these things just to get your career going, I'm happy to give them to you. But it's also for younger people that are starting their careers in Canada to be aware of these things, right? That help or hinder your success. So, and it was an interesting journey. And, so I was really happy with the book, how it turned out, and the publishers liked it. And so we went forward with it. And so, I'm really happy it resonates well with people, and it's helpful for people, really.
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, like I said earlier on the pre-show, before I moved here, someone goes like, "You need to go read Matt's book. you actually just to go read the book." And I absolutely agree. And what I find interesting is, do you think that, I read this book of recent, The Culture Map, that talks about how cultures are different and how, how we give feedback, how we take feedback, how we talk about stuff. And do you think that part of why the Canadian workplace culture is probably the way it is kind of linked to also the fact that, so Canadians can be direct, but they're also very indirect. So things are said and things are unsaid. And it feels like in the workplace, you now have this multicultural society that is trying to get into the workplace that has the Canadian value system, and then just all that is just kind of just clashing together, and some people are suffering for it in the end.
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? And I've had these conversations recently where people say, "Well, we're becoming there's a lot of cultural integration. There's a lot of talk about inclusion in the workplace." And I think the thing to remember is, Canada is a country of immigrants, and there is a culture here that has evolved over the last 100, 200 years. And people say, well, is that going to change now that we have a lot more immigration? And my thoughts are this: every country around the world, there's that culture, and there are gatekeepers, that keep that culture active and going. And it's interesting. So yeah, so the Canadian culture and the workplace culture, I think it's always going to be there. And I talk to people and I say, it's interesting too, in education, throughout the education system in a child's life, wherever it is in the world, those values are reinforced. Those approaches are reinforced. And it's very interesting. It's when your kids go through the school system, they are getting acclimatized to it. And so I'll share a funny story. It's like my daughter, I think she was in grade 4 or 5, and there was this assignment, and the instructions were quite interesting. It was she was doing this little project, but the question was, okay, you've got these 4 empty boxes, and these were the instructions. If we want you to draw something evolving, it could be a plant turns into a little flower, turns into a tree. Now, the instructions were, there's 3 boxes. So you can do your answer, draw these pictures in these 3 boxes. If you need more boxes, you can draw them on the back. So my daughter, you just used the 3 boxes, did her little pictures, the seed, the flower turning into a tree. Didn't get the mark she was looking for. I don't think she got a really high mark on that. So approached the teacher and said, well, what did I miss? And the teacher said that was a polite way of saying draw more boxes. And so, it's like, there it is, right? So, and that, that's so, as much as there is this influx of different cultures and there is this talk of, celebrating that diversity, there is essentially that culture that, and like I say, it is a nation of immigrants apart from, the First Nations and Indigenous peoples. But it's so we've had lots of different flows of immigration in our past. And so, is it going to change dramatically in the next coming years with different flows of immigration? I don't see it that much. I see more openness to inclusion, but these rules and these unspoken rules, they're going to be very much a part of the workplace, I think, moving into the future. So I think there's always some relevancy for this, right?
Yeah. And I think it makes sense these days that what you say, because they say culture is strategy for breakfast, and so we can dream all we want, but as long as you have the same institutions who have the same learning process and you have all those things happening, then it means that more often than not, because we're never going to have more immigrants than the people who are in the country. So
Yeah,
as no matter how much we go, you have kids who have gone through the system who get into the workplace. That's the culture they know. That's
right.
how their approach work. So
Right.
the immigrant comes in and meets that culture because they are the people who are living. That's all they know. They don't know anything else. And it's not a flaw. It's just how
Right.
you are raised, exactly. Because sometimes people tend to talk about the Canadian culture as if it's a flaw. I'm like, no, it's not a flaw. It's just like how back in my country in Nigeria, we are known to come late things. Like we come late. Like the African time is a real thing. People say African time, but it's not a joke. We joke about it, but it's 10 o'clock. Oh yeah, then we're going to start getting ready by 9:45, and then
Right.
we'll get there like 9:50. Oh, I'm so sorry. And then you come somewhere else, and then you come somewhere where when someone says 10 o'clock, it's 10 o'clock. And then you start to hit, just conflict and tension because your cultural nuance is just kind of hitting the other cultural nuance, and you have to find a way to say, what do you really want to be? Do you want to hold on to who you were before? Or do you want to kind of say, okay, part of adaptation or integration is saying, I have to live in a new culture. I think that's part of where immigrants is that tension that people kind of struggle with and find difficult.
Yeah, that's well said. And when we talk about things like emotional intelligence and how people develop and improve in their relationships, oftentimes we have this default style of communication that's always worked for us. And we tend to, when we're in different situations or unknown situations, fall back to that. And oftentimes if we want to develop ourselves and our emotional and social intelligence, we need to notice that, we need to adjust those skill sets. We need to maybe add more tools. And so as we grow as human beings, we're constantly adapting, and we have to be flexible. And sometimes it's a big shift when you move to a completely different culture than you're not used to. It takes a bigger shift, and it takes a lot more learning and desire to learn. And so, yeah, so there's those things can happen. And I've experienced that living overseas, right? It's you just really have to reshape your perspective.
Yes.
And there's I don't think there's a perfect culture anywhere in the world. There's always great things, and there's always some challenges we work through. Canada's no different than anywhere else, and it's just different. I suppose it's just a different culture with a different way of doing things, a different traditions, different approaches, and and if you're coming with a really strong skill set from a previous place, you're going to be wondering, well, how can I make this fit? How can I make this work? And it just takes practice. It's just like learning a language, isn't it?
Yes.
It takes a little practice. You learn from others. You mimic how other people sound. You try to adapt to that. You try to identify good speakers that you can maybe start to emulate. The language sounds a little better. Like it's a process. Learning a language is a process, and and so learning a culture and is similar. Just observing and getting mentors and trying to pick up some of those things. And you're not taking anything away from yourself. You're enhancing your skill set. So just think of people that learn another language. Now they can reach another audience.
Yes.
Now they can move into another realm and meet new people, experience new things. And it's the same with moving to another place. It's just, take that as an opportunity to learn a new style, a new approach, and some people say, well, I lose my sense of identity if I do that.
No.
You add to it, you enhance it, and so, yeah, I think that's a journey we're all on.
Yeah.
So that's a great point you raise.
Yeah, and gosh, I like that so much because, while you're saying that, a thought came to my head about how it feels like a lot of the conversation has been centered around how, God forgive me, how politicians drive these conversations, how people who have agendas drive these conversations, because we make it so nuanced. So rather, we strip away all the nuance and just simplify it to you adapt the culture and you lose yourself. But like you said, it's so nuanced. It's not black and white. It's not some yes and no thing. It and maybe it kind of goes back to what you said earlier. It's just all emotional intelligence. It's just being able to understand that really you're a much better person if you can move between cultures. Like I tell people that I call immigrants the in-betweeners, that we are so powerful because I am no more just Nigerian anymore. I'm Nigerian Canadian. And I say Nigerian Canadian because I spent 30 years of my life in Nigeria. So that's probably the big part of my life right now. And then over time, I'm becoming Canadian. I tell people my kids are Canadian Nigerians because they're growing up here. So they're Canadians first, but they're never going to be fully Canadians because they have Nigerian uncles and they have Nigerian parents. So I'll have some effect on how they are. But that is a superpower. And, that's why I say we're always in between cultures. And then, so why would you try to see that as a weakness and say, oh, you are losing your identity?
Yeah, a beautiful point. And I think you're right. I think embracing that is a beautiful thing, having that opportunity to have that full experience in different cultures and to live one, work in another, or vice versa. It's a beautiful thing. And you talked a little bit about diversity and inclusion, and that's another thing, being open to that, so, and I think there's room to be accepting of that, open to that, and that enhances that emotional intelligence as well and expands our horizons as human beings, right? So it's a beautiful thing, but there's challenges with it, and people are human beings, right? There's strains connected to making those big adaptations in your life and getting out of your comfort zone, but yeah, there's a world of great things waiting on the other side too.
Yeah. So let me just ask a very tactical question right now. So if you were to say, I mean, just from what you know and from the book itself, like, what do you think are like the three biggest themes that I want to call them like pillars of the Canadian workplace culture that a newcomer should always look out for? Like the things that you should say, you're just coming to the country, like learn these three things, and once you learn them, and I hate saying that because that feels like I'm kind of compress it into into something pithy and for social and all that, for engagement. But really, like, basically, what are the first steps probably to take, or the things you look out for that helps you kind of start the journey towards understanding the workplace culture in Canada?
Well, that's a really good question, and there's always a lot. It's hard to define a culture in just a short time or just a few points, but I think the main thing is, if you're adjusting to a new culture, the first thing you have to be is really turn on your observation skills, really be a good listener. Oftentimes we hear things like, people say, do you have Canadian workplace experience, things like that. And I think it's the point there is, are people, making an effort to try to understand kind of how people communicate? And I was faced with that same kind of question when I returned to Canada, because I was out of the country for so long. It's like, and I think that just by simply volunteering for a Canadian non-for-profit, or doing a little work on the side, just having that experience, watching how people have conversations, just observing, trying to identify what's the one communicator that seems to be having the best impact with the people around them. Try to identify what are some of the characteristics, what are some of the personality traits that they're demonstrating. So I think very importantly, first of all, is to just be observant, watch, take notes, listen. And in terms of really getting to know the Canadian workplace culture, traditionally there is a workplace culture that stays away from conflict, doesn't like conflict, and so things have been built around that. And what's come from that is, in a way to avoid conflict, there has become a rather indirect way of expressing oneself, so we're not too direct and potentially could hurt feelings. And so the one big thing is, and I often talk about this too, is teamwork, what that looks like in a Canadian workplace. And I compare it sometimes when we look at kind of an American workplace. Teamwork is kind of high performance individuals coming together and having debates and helpful conflicts, but it's very much around what individuals bring to the team, the strengths they bring. In the Canadian concept of team, it's about what can you bring to support your team. In other words, they are important, and so it's a humble approach. And a really nice example recently, for example, in that case, was, I don't know if you're familiar with Sidney Crosby, big famous hockey player, Canadian hockey player, brilliant, high scoring. He's a captain of the Pittsburgh Penguins, led Canada to perhaps, I think it's 1 or 2 gold medals in the Winter Olympics. But recently in the news, he was re-signing for a contract for the Penguins, and he took a cut. He took a pay cut, and he's a top star, and he took that a cut to be a part of the team again. And I believe he was asked, like, why did you take that cut? And he said, if I get paid less, they can afford to buy stronger players. And if they can buy stronger players, we can work together and we can be a championship team, more or less is what he explained. And that is a very special piece there. It's like, it's not about me, even though superstar, right? Superstar, but it's not about me. And it takes more than just an individual to make a team work. And I need to sacrifice myself, my own interests a little bit to make sure the team is fully formed and functioning the best that they can be. And I thought that was a real telling example of kind of what that Canadian teamwork looks and sounds like. And so if you're coming from a pretty direct background, oftentimes what we see is people want to know what you're bringing and they want you to highlight for them. If I hire you, I want to know, Dawes, what's your background? Versus in the Canadian teamwork context, it's like, you have been hired. You are an expert. You don't need to tell everybody. Entering into the team and just kind of being humble about it, and making an effort to get to know others on that team, and getting to know their expertise, how long they've worked there, what they do. And it's not about me. It's like, I want to support this team, and by showing them that, there's that humility there, and willingness to put the team first, and then from that, there's all kinds of different communication pieces that come. How do we do that? How does it look? What do conversations in a team context look like? What does a supportive tone sound like? How do all those pieces play together? And ultimately, I think those are some core things that I think when that people get into that. And really, it's not just people coming from abroad or coming from super direct cultures. I see that too with young people that are finishing high school. And I was talking to a group the other day, and I often think high school students are not fully prepared for that reality either, so I think there's always a lot of room to really think about these things and think about how important it is to try to fit in a little bit rather than stand apart. And so it's that kind of approach I find really quite telling, and I think it takes a readjustment a little bit to put yourself, for example, I often in my talks, and I've studied American history, I've taught American studies, and I'm quite familiar with American values, and it's a bit of a contrast with Canada in that sense. Individualism in the United States, for example, is highly praised. What you bring, the talents you bring, and you should be proud of those and talk about those, and versus, a more indirect culture in Canada, it's like being a more modest about that, and people know it, but you don't have to constantly share it. And so it's a bit different, I don't know. I want people to think of it as fun and adventurous. It's how can you express yourself in different places at different times? How can you connect really well with people? And strong communication is always about understanding other people first. And so that's what we focus on when we talk about communication skills. And so it's the same, I think, anywhere. I think you want to show that you're interested in the people's expertise around you. It's not about me, it's about us. And so I don't know. Dodds, we could go all day on that, but
Honestly, I can even see some of the mistakes I made when I just moved. Like, how, because sometimes as an immigrant, you're in a hurry to prove yourself. You're in a hurry to really show that you can do this.
Yeah.
Sometimes you also feel like you took a step down with some of the decisions you made. And so you're in a hurry to kind of get up the ladder. And so you want to just kind of show. And what I hear you say, which is a really strong point, is that that can also be that can turn into a downside for you, because literally you can literally put your foot in your mouth without knowing, just because you're eager, and then you don't take time to understand what's being said and what's not being said. And it looks like in Canada we're very indirect here. And I hear you on that part about no conflicts, the team first over the individual, like the team over the individual every single time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you're right. Everybody has a desire to get ahead and to move up the ladder a little bit. But it's important to really study and learn, and the best leaders are ones that are constantly reading, constantly learning. And we all need to be doing that. And so yeah, how do we navigate those things is really important. And and that's why I always recommend volunteering. If you're new to a place, volunteer so you can really soak in how people are working. And when you're volunteering with local organizations, you get to see the passion that people have and how they communicate. And it's always very helpful to do that. But yeah, you're right, it's just taking that step back. And because coming from direct cultures, I'll give you an example, just to contrast a little bit about Canadian versus the United States in terms of that individualism. When those books first came out, I would go and I would do talks, and my audiences were Canadian in libraries and things. And I just noticed this, I would get up there and I would introduce myself. I'm Matt. I wrote this book. I wrote that book. And as I was talking about myself, I just noticed the audience doing this. I was talking too much about myself, right? So they were just starting to get a little bit, they were a little uncomfortable with it. And I found that when there's a poster, so if I'm going to present and there's a poster, people have read the poster, people know the books, I just jump up and I talk. And then people are very engaged because I'm not talking about myself or I've done this. The people get more engaged. It's a bit of they know you don't have to talk about it. Now, I went to the United States one time, and I with this experience with Canadian Audience, so I got up on the stage and I thought, I'm just going to start talking. So I said, yeah, welcome everybody. And then everybody was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's like, wait a minute, tell us a little bit about what you've done. What have you do? What's your background? And I was really, it was awkward. And I've written some books, and I was shy to say it, because it's on the poster, it's in the thing. And they're like, well, what did you write about? Like, what are some of the topics? And talked about this, and they're like, that's really interesting. What else have you done? And it got really personal too. It's like, what about your family? What are they doing? And it's like, how are they adjusting? And then I don't know, it was really interesting. But if the fact that I just got up and started talking without establishing my credibility, because they're very much, they celebrate that individualism to the point that if you don't step forward with that or what you can do, it creates an awkwardness. Mm-hmm, but in Canada, it's kind of the opposite. It's kind of when you take a step back and you just show that, I guess, a little bit more of a humble approach. And I'm just here for you. I'm here to give you information so I can support you. It resonates really well with people, and they feel really comfortable about that. And I think it speaks to, that culture we're talking about. And yeah, you're right. It's just adjusting our delivery, really, and
Gosh, culture is such it's scary and it's interesting, and I don't know, honestly. Like, anytime I think about it, like, because I've worked with an American company and I currently work with a Canadian company, and okay. I know that thing you say about how in America it's the individual always wins. Like, the individual needs to win. You need to show up. You need to talk. You need to be bold. You need to. Like, you just need to show up. If you don't show up, you get eaten alive.
You do. And it's interesting, isn't it? And and you need to present your ideas. And if somebody asks your opinion, you got to have one.
Yeah.
And they've done, and what they've incorporated into that is this: they don't have a fear of conflict. if you ask somebody from, somebody with that American culture we're talking about, and you say, what's conflict? They'll define it as something extreme, like two people yelling in the street. The conversations are like, if I ask, like, what do you think of that? What do you think of that? What do you think about that? And you say, well, I kind of like it because of this. I might say, why do you like it? Well, I like it. Why don't you like it? And we go back and forth. And in that context, it's in an American conversational context, that's a good conversation. It's like us debating our points of view. If we do that in Canada, that's gets complicated. If I say, well, hey, what do you think of that? I really enjoyed that. What do you think? And if you say, well, I didn't really like it, it's like, wow. That's a conflict. Just that small piece is a conflict, and so it's kind of interesting to understand that. And so, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You really got to show up. And I've been in that situation. I've been in the States where they say, Matt, what do you think? And I say, I don't know. It was this or that. And they're like, what did you think? Did you like it or didn't you like it? And I felt like the conversation was kind of getting to kind of that situation, but it's not. It's just the way that, indirect conversations might happen. And everybody's a friend after. Right. Nobody's hurt by those conversations. And it was interesting, but yeah, in Canada, people take a very cautious approach because the emphasis is on the feelings of the other person. Don't want to create a conflict. So even things like the weather, if I say it's pretty warm today, and if somebody says to me, Matt, it's pretty warm today, and if I say, well, it's a little cool for me, that's a bit of a conflict. It's like, why did I need to do that? This person seemed like very pleased with the fact that it was warm for them. A simple response is, yeah, it's a nice day. And then you have a connection with that person and they feel safe. They feel like, okay, this is a person that doesn't feel the need to press their opinions all the time. This is the kind of person that if we're in a meeting, they're not going to disagree and have to present another way all the time. This is a person that was actually in the moment thinking of me and thought very carefully and kindly to support me in that moment. And those little interactions go a long way. And so, but in a more direct culture, maybe people wouldn't be afraid to say, well, I don't know, this isn't weather for me. And it's like, oh yeah, where are you from? Well, I'm from here where it's kind of a lot warmer. Oh, that's cool. And they go back and forth, right? Opinions matter. And, but it's curious, so I find so people here, they'll avoid like politics and religion, but still there's nuances to weather conversations.
Gosh. But don't you think, and we're rounding up right now, I probably just have this one more question, but don't you think that in itself has its own downsides in the sense that we probably just end up not saying the real things, or we dance around the hard topics because no one wants to upset the other person? Like, so how do we, like, from your experience, like, how do we find the balance to get the hard things done? I think for me, like, especially for me, like, that's for me is a big thing. Like, how do you find what's the nuance to get have those hard conversations or get hard things done that needs someone to say, okay, this is the step we need to take to get this going, because we've all just been kind of like, you know what, I don't want to hurt anyone, so let's not spoil this.
Well, it's an interesting question. And, years ago, I was doing a talk like this in the library in Calgary, and there was a CEO that attended that was from the United States that just recently got a job, a similar positioning in Calgary at the time. And I remember we finished the talk, and then he came to me after. He says, I've got a really big challenge. And I said, what is it? He says, well, when I was in the United States and we had a challenge to face, I brought in my leadership team and I threw that problem on the table. I said, 30 minutes, let's fix it. And they argued back and forth. They came up with ideas. They challenged each other. And it was just back and forth. And it was active, and people disagreed with each other. And then after we were so happy with the results, we all went for lunch and we had such a great time. He said, so I was managing a group of people here. I had some managers, the Canadian office, and I came in and I tried that approach. I said, here's our challenge. Let's fix it. Silence. Nobody said anything. And he says, what happened? And I said, well, relationships are a bit complicated in an indirect place. And there's certain things people are trying to be very conscious of. And that's A, not showing off, and B, not making colleagues look bad. And so if you throw a group of people in the room without any notice, they're going to be quiet because they don't really know what other people are thinking. And so I said, try to get an agenda out about a week before so people can approach one another in the lunchroom or in the hallway and say, hey, we got that meeting. What do you think about that? I can say, well, I don't know. I was thinking about this. What do you think? And so it's like, okay. And so we get some ideas. And then we have these conversations where, it's not complete disagreement. Like you'd say, I think we should do this. And I would carefully say, that's an interesting idea. Have we thought about this? So we have these kind of indirect ways of disagreeing, but having the conversation. And the other thing is, I said, the other danger you get yourself into by putting everybody in the room and then asking an answer. What if somebody put their hand up and said, I have the solution? I said, do you realize that person's, kind of putting themselves at risk with their colleagues, because their colleagues might look to them and say, oh, look at you standing out with the idea. And you put them in a situation where they might have disrupted their relationships with their colleagues. So give them an opportunity before the meeting, like have them approach their colleagues and say, yeah, we got this meeting and I think this might be a good idea. What do you think? And they might say, Matt, that is a good idea. You should bring that up. Yeah, you think so? Yeah, maybe it's something we could work and we could share some ideas. So when we get to the meeting and maybe the head person at the table says, okay, what should we do? Somebody might say, Matt has a good idea. And I'm saying, well, we talked about it together. It was, we kind of brought it up together as a team. But yeah, we were looking at this and and then everybody kind of chimes in and they're like, yeah, we had that discussion. We thought that was a good idea. So it's taking that time. You can do it. It's just a different skill set.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, so in that direct environment, when people were to argue back and forth, that's beautiful. It's amazing to see a team do that. In a more indirect setting, likely that wouldn't be the best choice, or, there'd be probably another way to do it would be effective. So there's a way. It's just, knowing, it's like moving to a new culture, it's, you can't, it's like you bring your ideas, and if you're with a team and they have a way of doing things, are we just going to say, well, this is the way we do it, when they've been doing it for as long as they have been, right? So it's just, being flexible. There's other ways. I don't know. I'm talking too much here, Dawes. Maybe it's
no, you aren't actually.
I think it's
you aren't. Honestly, you aren't, because like that's so.
too much.
I'm telling you. The Japanese, I think it's like the Japanese. So consensus building. That's what I get there is that, and I have never thought about it this way. Is that the fact, especially here in Canada, that you need to build consensus, especially because if you don't, the simple answer is nobody's going to say anything. But the hard and the unspoken answer is that you're going to create rifts in the workplace, because someone is, oh yeah, I'm the star. The other people are like, oh, you were standing out. You think I don't have good ideas? I kept quiet for a reason, because I was going to on the behalf of the team, not on the behalf of myself.
Yeah, you're right. That's a really nice point you bring up about those people that are talented, that are quiet, are probably doing out of respect for their colleagues, because they don't want to show them off. And so when somebody suddenly puts their hand up, it's like, it's kind of breaking that circle of trust a little bit with everybody, and you're right. It's that consensus, collaboration is very key. And so it's interesting. Wow, that was a good point, Dawes. Yeah, that's an interesting piece there. And it's curious. It's interesting.
It's interesting, honestly. And I think the last question I have is more like is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask about the topic, or something else?
Well, I don't know. And well, it's I don't I think that sometimes questions that come back to me are so yeah, what are some questions that come back sometimes? Well, you talked about do I have to sacrifice myself? I Why can't I bring my whole self to work? In terms of I just want to express who I am and what I do, and I just and if and it's just a simple thing. It's like it's sometimes we're depending on where we are, we got to put the feelings of the group first, the team first, understand the dynamics, but nobody's giving up on their individualism. In that sense, some people see, well, you keep talking about the team, you keep talking about fitting in. I have ideas, I want to express myself, and my answer to that is you can just develop a different way to communicate it. Just that's all you need to do. There's not just one way to communicate. Just try to develop some other avenues. You will be heard. And people think that if I'm not standing out and giving my opinions, what value am I bringing? The fact is, in that indirect workplace culture, when everyone knows you have that expertise but aren't pushing it forward, there's a real respect for you as an individual, and so you are respected as an individual and you are seen as an individual. But that humility is really what enhances your presence, and so just knowing that, and so you're not giving anything up, you're not sacrificing your individual style, you're just using a different skill set, and you are and people appreciate that about you. Flexibility is a key thing in everything we do, and when you show that flexibility for the good of your team, that enhances their feelings about you. And so I think I don't want people thinking, well, I just got to give everything up, then I got to be a totally different person. You are a great person, you're going to continue to be a great person, and by demonstrating a couple of different skills in different circumstances, you're demonstrating an even more impressive skill set than ever. And people see it and they appreciate it, right? So I think sometimes that comes up, and I guess I could touch on that, but
Yeah, no, that's really good. And you just left me with two things that I'm going to go think about. I'm just going to share them here. I mean, I think they're a bit controversial in a way, but they're thoughts I'll think about for the rest of the year, honestly. First one is, I feel like we live in a world where the individual has become the thing.
Mhm.
And it's probably driven by the American culture, because at some, like they say, social has flattened cultures. And so social media makes cultures very monolithic. One
Interesting.
thing goes across the world and everyone does that thing. I think Kyle Chaka has this brilliant book on it, Filter World or something. But humans have survived for a pretty long time, not because we are individuals, but because we worked as groups. But we've now live in a world where we're being told about being the individual. And so we come into places and we say, why aren't you allowing me be the individual? Yes, you can be the individual, and yes, you don't have to lose yourself. But the truth is that we are where we are today as a society, and all the things you see because of the power of the group. It does
Wow.
has it does have its flaws, but it's just something worth thinking about from about all this conversation about the indie, because the culture seems very individual. Me, myself, what do I think? Who am I? I am X. Like, I'm like, no.
Right.
I need something to think about. And the second part for me is kind of built off that. When people say I am giving up part of my identity, I do think that, just listening to all what you said, I do think that the day you decide to immigrate, you kind of have to accept that your whole self is not enough anymore, because you've moved to a new country and your whole self has, it's incomplete because there's a new culture you're in right now.
Interesting.
and you're taking your whole self and saying that is no, but like you have to adapt or add part of that new culture to make yourself whole again. Because really, the day you moved out of that country, you literally became incomplete, because what you're calling your whole self is how you are raised back home. That's what you're calling your whole self. But you've moved into a new space, so what is whole anymore? Like, why are you saying I can't bring my whole self? No, you don't really lose yourself. You add more to yourself, and then you become better, and you find ways to balance it. But again, like I said, they're very controversial thoughts, because I know people can take them in very interesting ways and take them to very different lengths. And it's something I want to think about a bit more. But those are things that you left me with here today,
Wow.
honestly.
Well, I don't know if I left those with you. Those are incredible ideas that you've expressed on your own there. And and you're right. I love that concept about, and it kind of ties back to when we were talking about that default, that default we always go to because it's comfortable and it's us. And that's an interesting concept. When we say this is our whole self, but when we move, you know what? We're expanding that whole self.
Yes.
These are new elements to make ourselves even fuller,
Yes.
and it's not like this is my full self and I'm going to bring it here. It's like you're bringing your full self, but you're expanding that, and that's that emotional intelligence and it's social intelligence. It expands, and it incorporates, it changes it, and it adapts. And so you're right. That's a beautiful way of looking at it. And I hadn't thought about it in that way. And that's nice. That's a nice way to put it.
Thank you so much. Honestly, like, this has been extremely good for me. Like, I learned so much, honestly.
Well, I learned from you too, Dawes. And that's the strength of your role as a host, and you bring a lot here. And those are some I've left here with a lot of great things to think about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those two ideas I talked about at the end, I'm really thinking about them. That concept of the whole self, and the fact that, individualism versus team culture, and how the world is all about the individual right now. I don't know if anyone of them is right or wrong, just what I'm thinking about. But if you found this useful, please help me share with anyone who like it too. If you know someone who just moved to Canada who's trying to get a job, I think please send this to them to listen to, and also ask them to buy Matt's book. Peace out.